U.S. House overwhelmingly passes a measure banning China from buying American farmland. Taiwanese President, U.S. and Taiwan are closer than ever. Many China's field hospitals were abandoned, wasting tens of billions in investments. The Chinese Communist regime influences governments and policies worldwide. Eye on China, Japan to tighten chip-making equipment exports.
A bipartisan House majority overwhelmingly passed a measure on March 30th to protect U.S. rural land critical for renewable energy, keeping it away from Chinese investors. The measure, an amendment from the Defend America's Rural Energy Act, sponsored by Representative Randy Feenstra from Iowa, was approved with a vote of 407 to 26. 223 Republicans and 184 Democrats voted in favor of the measure. Feenstra said, China must be banned from buying American farmland suitable for ethanol and biodiesel production, which is vital to our rural economy in Iowa. He added, simply put, my amendment keeps China far away from our farmland because American farmland belongs to American farmers. Recently, U.S. lawmakers and local leaders nationwide have raised concerns over Chinese investors' land purchases. The increasing number of land purchases from Chinese investors has sparked concern that the Chinese regime may be using the land for spying on the U.S. Data shows that the land acquisition from China has been jumping significantly. From 2010 to 2021, land purchases from Chinese investors have surged by a nearly 30-fold increase in just over a decade. A land purchase near the Air Force's most extensive training base in Texas in 2015 from a China-based energy firm drew scrutiny. This Chinese company purchased over 130,000 acres of ranch land to develop a wind farm. The founder of the Chinese energy firm is a former Chinese military officer and has close ties with Beijing. The Air Force recently said that a proposed Chinese corn mill near its base in Grand Forks, North Dakota, presented national security concerns. The Grand Forks City Council in February unanimously voted to cancel the project. Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska, one of the largest food-producing states in the U.S., noted, "This is a grave concern, particularly since tensions with China are at an all-time high."
Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen said that the U.S. and Taiwan are closer than ever during a stopover in New York on her way to Central America. Tsai also praised significant progress in economic and security cooperation between the two countries. She cited the example of Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company Limited, the world's largest contract chipmaker, building a factory in Phoenix, Arizona, demonstrating Taiwan's technological strength. She also thanked the U.S. government for implementing security agreements with Taiwan, including 9 announced arms sales by President Joe Biden's administration. Tsai noted that Taiwan faced enormous challenges but would not be isolated and called the island a beacon of democracy in Asia. According to Reuters, Tsai delivered the speech during a closed-door meeting with overseas Taiwanese in New York on Wednesday, March 29th. The Chinese Communist Party warns of a serious confrontation in U.S.-China relations if Tsai meets with the U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy during her stopover in Los Angeles next week. Tsai plans to attend an event at the Hudson Institute on Thursday before leaving New York. Tsai's last U.S. trip was in July 2019 as she visited Caribbean countries with diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Tsai's visit comes during heightened tensions between the U.S. and the CCP over trade, human rights, and Taiwan's sovereignty. The CCP claims Taiwan as its territory and has threatened to use force to bring it under its control. Taiwan rejects this claim and maintains that it is an independent nation. The U.S., which switched diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing in 1979, does not have formal ties with Taiwan, but is its most important ally and arms supplier. It has been several months since China scrapped its zero-COVID policy. However, gigantic quarantine facilities designed to house hundreds of thousands of Chinese remain standing, and it raises questions as to what their future use will be. According to Al Jazeera, satellite images show that large-scale quarantine facilities in 3 major Chinese provinces, Guangdong, Shandong, and Sichuan, are still intact, and their structure has not changed significantly. The satellite images cover 6 quarantine centers in the 3 provinces. Among them, Guangzhou Nansha Cabin Hospital has a capacity of 80,000 people with over 20,000 rooms. This center was just completed last November, and it sits abandoned. The square cabin model was established during the COVID-19 outbreak to quarantine and treat positive patients and close contacts. Although the Chinese government later used the inexpensive containers to build the shelters, the cost was still enormous. Besides the square cabins, numerous abandoned nucleic acid testing booths exist in major cities and towns. In fact, according to the China News Center, as early as January 2020, China's National Development and Reform Commission allocated 530 million yuan, or over $77 million, to quickly build 2 field hospitals in Wuhan, where the outbreak originated. Subsequently, China's State Construction Engineering Corporation allocated an additional $72.8 million for the project, following the field hospital building model in the 2003 SARS outbreak. But surprisingly, these 2 temporary quarantine facilities were dismantled in April 2020. As Sina cited the Chinese government's documents, Shandong province issued a special bond in 2022 to build a cabin hospital with a total investment of about $3.35 billion. But in 2023, some netizens exposed photos of the Shandong cabin hospital on Twitter and wrote, "Now only the massive cabin hospitals remain, standing quietly in the cold winter winds." In addition, in a video on Twitter on March 26, it can be seen that a cabin hospital in Qingyuan City, Guangdong Province, has not even been completed. Hundreds of local quarantine areas have been completed, but some infrastructure was abandoned halfway, and the roads are still unfinished. According to a netizen, the container investor was said to have fainted from crying because he couldn't get his money back. Regarding this, Chi Chunwei, director of the Center for Global Health at Oregon State University, the U.S., said the design of quarantine hospitals is completely different from those of emergency ones. The primary purpose of these quarantine facilities is quarantine, not treatment. Recently, many Chinese provinces disclosed bad debts for pandemic prevention in 2022 in their fiscal 2023 budget reports. Among them, Guangdong ranks first with $10.35 billion. Sheshang is $6.3 billion, Beijing is nearly $4.36 billion, Shanghai $2.44 billion, and Shanxi $2.76 billion. The money has already been spent. Authorities might come up with new ideas to make use of these structures to save face. Various publications and reports have highlighted the influence that the Chinese Communist Party generates over governments and domestic policies in countries worldwide. The CCP has used the same tactic of offering money at a low cost, even knowing that governments could not meet the repayment deadlines. In exchange for this, Chinese embassies force governments to respond with favors, concessions, and the possibility of deciding on domestic policy matters. For years, Falun Dafa practitioners have been denouncing beatings, discrimination, arbitrary imprisonment, spying, and other forms of persecution by the Chinese embassy with the complicity of local officials and politicians. They are also denouncing severe censorship and discrimination by the authorities. They are prohibiting the rental of the prestigious Colon Theater to the Chinese classical music and dance company, Shen Yun, precisely because it compromises practitioners of this discipline.
The Japanese government on Friday said it plans to restrict exports of 23 types of semiconductor manufacturing equipment. The move is in response to a call by the United States to limit China's ability to produce advanced chips, reported Asia Nikkei on March 31st. Japan's Ministry of Trade and Industry said it would put export controls on 6 types of equipment used in chip production. These types of equipment include cleaning, deposition, lithography, and etching. The newspaper said Japan did not designate China as a target. They require equipment manufacturers to apply for export permits for all regions. The ministry added that its goal is to prevent using advanced technology for military purposes. The ministry said, "We are fulfilling our responsibility as a technological nation to contribute to international peace and stability." These export restrictions will take effect in July, and dozens of Japanese companies, such as Nikon and Tokyo Electron, are potentially affected. The Japanese decision follows an October decision by the U.S. to impose sweeping restrictions on exports of chip-making tools to China. The reason is that the US fears that Beijing will use advanced chips to strengthen its military power. However, for these restrictions to take effect, Japan and the Netherlands must be involved, because Japan and the Netherlands are other essential equipment suppliers. As for the Netherlands, the government in a letter to Parliament this month also said it plans to restrict exports of chipmaking equipment. The Dutch company ASML Holding is the leading supplier of advanced lithography machines. According to the newspaper, earlier in January, Japan and the Netherlands agreed with the US to limit the export of chipmaking equipment to China. But it's also reported that Tokyo has not publicly acknowledged that it has agreed to such restrictions against China specifically. As for China, the country accuses the United States of being a tech hegemon because of its export restrictions.